We're returning back to the Revised Common Lectionary for a while after finishing up my last sermon series, and going to take some time to return to that for a time being. And when I read today's gospel lesson from the 8th chapter of the book of Mark, I started wondering and thinking, what would it be like to write a help wanted ad for church membership? Have you ever thought about that? If we were going to put a help wanted out there, trying to get members to the church, what would we say? I started thinking about that, and I came up with a tongue-in-cheek version. Okay? A tongue-in-cheek version to try to attract folks. Here it is. Come to church so that Jesus can give you your best life now. Easy, flexible scheduling. No commitments, no pressure. Work church around your current lifestyle. Receive irrevocable benefits with no obligation on your part. And when you want, involve yourself where you want. Little or no financial obligation necessary. Be comforted that you are loved and accepted just as you are, with no need to change or grow, and receive assurance that the problems you are experiencing are just temporary and are caused by something outside yourself. How does that sound as an advertisement? Okay, maybe it's a little bit over the top, but maybe not by too much. Because I tend to think sometimes we like our Christianity easy. We like our Christianity to be comfortable. We want it to be like that free ice cream cone that some restaurants give you as you walk out the door. Sweet, satisfying, leaving you with a pleasant taste in your mouth and a smile on your face. But Jesus' own help want ad is far, far different than that. Jesus' help want ad that he sets forth today is far less sweet, far less pleasant, and far less appetizing. It all starts when Jesus and his disciples are walking towards Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus is making some pleasant conversation with them, as you're apt to do with traveling, and he's trying to kind of take the temperature of the society. He looks at his disciples and say, who do folks say that I am? Jesus, of course, is a public figure. He's out there preaching and teaching all the time. He's not doing quite as much interacting with folks as his disciples are. And so his disciples start bringing it back. And they say, well, some people believe that you are John the Baptist, raised from the dead. Others believe that you are Elijah coming to prepare the way for the Messiah. Still others think that you are a prophet. Now, Jesus takes all of this in, and it's not much different than our society today, because, if you go out into society today and you ask people who they think Jesus is, you're going to get a whole lot of opinions as well. You get some people who say that Jesus was a great moral teacher. You get others who say, well, he was a great founder of a religion, just like Muhammad or Buddha. Believe it or not, you'll get some people who say that Jesus didn't even exist, that he's a fictional character. All sorts of opinions today, just like there were back then. But Jesus knows that's not the best question to ask. Just like then, it's not the best question to ask now. The best question to ask now, as it was then, is, who do you say Jesus is? And that's exactly what Jesus asks his disciples next. Great. It's great to hear what everybody else is saying, but who do you say that I am? And I'm sure there was a pregnant pause. I'm sure the disciples had to wrestle a little bit with that question, because they had seen some things out of Jesus. They had walked with him and done things that were simply amazing. They were there when Jesus calmed the storm. They were there when he fed 5,000 men plus women and children. They were there when he healed the sick and cast out demons. They were there when he raised the dead. I'm sure they thought long and hard before Peter finally answered. You are the Messiah. Now, I don't know if you know how earth-shattering that proclamation would have been. But the Jewish people had been waiting for the Messiah for centuries. They yearned for him. They longed for him. They wanted him to come because he was going to do three things that would turn the world upside down and make it much, much better. He would cleanse the temple. He would overthrow the enemies of Israel, which at the time would be the Romans. And he would usher in the kingdom of God with its justice for the world. Which, of course, in their mind meant that Israel would be the top kingdom over all of the world, judging the world and bringing God's peace. Every Jew wanted this deeply. And if you notice, Jesus doesn't correct Peter. Jesus doesn't tell Peter he's wrong. Jesus says, keep it quiet. Jesus says, don't tell anyone. It's like, why not? Why not? I mean, this is outstanding news. This is earth-shattering news. You would think you'd want to share this with as many people as possible and gather crowds and gather people together. Why keep it quiet? That mystery lessens just a little bit in the next verses when we hear that Jesus began teaching his disciples that the Son of Man was going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes to suffer, to die, and then on the third day to rise again. This was utterly shocking. As shocking as it was to hear that Jesus was the Messiah, it was even more shocking for him to begin teaching his disciples that he was going to be handed over to the authorities by the chief priests and the scribes, because they too would have wanted the Messiah to come. It was shocking to hear that the Messiah would suffer. It was shocking to hear that the Messiah would die. And then it was ultimately shocking to hear that the Messiah would rise again. No good Jew believed this stuff. No one. You can go read their writings from before Jesus and so on and so forth. You will not see anywhere where they believed the Messiah would suffer, die, and rise again. It just wasn't a part of their plan. It wasn't a part of their thought process. In fact, it was so utterly shocking, the disciples believed that Jesus was out of his mind. Check that. It's worse. They believed that Jesus was possessed. How do I know that? Because the word right there, right after Jesus teaches that, Peter takes Jesus aside. And what is the word that is used right there in the English language? What does it say that Peter did to Jesus? What was it? Can't hear you. What was the word that is used? Rebuked. That is the same word in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus uses all throughout when he is talking to the demons. When Jesus speaks and casts out a demon, he rebukes it. Same word. Peter is using the exact same word with Jesus. Peter thinks Jesus is possessed. And of course, Jesus then turns the tables. He doesn't put up with it. He in turn rebukes Peter using the same word of casting out demons, except he drives it home and tells Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus has just called Peter the Lord of lies, the ultimate enemy of God. Because you are setting your mind on human things, not on divine things. Now, could you imagine Jesus doing that in our day and age? Could you imagine Jesus standing in front of a church, any church, and looking at one of the church members and saying, "You are Satan, get behind me"? What do you think that would do in that congregation? I mean, be honest. Everybody probably look at him and go, "You know, this guy's got some issues. We need to send him to counseling. We need to send him to anger management. You know, we may need to get rid of this guy. We don't want him calling down a congregation member like this." I don't know where people get this warm, fuzzy image of Jesus all the time. That Jesus was just loving and compassionate and caring, and he just loved everybody regardless of whatever. Do you see him doing that to Peter? Yes or no? Am I the only one who sees that? I mean, he is harsh. Because he knows that Peter is trying to drive him away from his mission. to save the world. And then Jesus throws down the gauntlet. Jesus gives his help-wanted ad for his followers. Brings everybody together. He says, if you want to be my disciple, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save their life will lose it, but anyone who loses their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. But do you hear Jesus' words there? Deny yourself. Give up all of your hopes, give up all your dreams, give up all your desires, give up all your wants. Put them all on the back burner, get rid of them. Deny them to follow me. But not only deny them, take up your cross. Do you know how those folks would have heard that? I mean, that would have knocked them on their tail ends. Because they would have been, wait a minute. We know what the cross is. We've seen our countrymen hung on them. We know that it's an instrument of torture and death. Jesus, you're telling us to get ready to die. Much different than the way we tend to look at that verse. I mean, a lot of times when we think about it, we think about carrying our cross and we think about, I've got a burden to bear. I've got a chronic illness or chronic pain that I have to live with. That's my cross to bear. I don't like my job, but I have to stay at it and keep at it to keep my family fed. That's my cross to bear. I may have some family issues and things that I'm going through, and they're painful and difficult, and that's my cross to bear. That's what we talk about in our day today. And I'm not trying to diminish our pain. I'm not trying to diminish our suffering and the things that we go through. But that's not what the disciples would have heard. That's not what those around Jesus would have heard. They would have heard Jesus saying, get ready to suffer. Get ready to die to follow me. And if you think you're going to save your life by walking away, if you think you're going to run and take care of yourself, that's when you're actually going to lose your life. But if you really want to save it, be prepared to lose it for my sake and the sake of the gospel. How many people do you think would respond to that help-wanted ad? I mean, and honestly, you may be like me. You may be looking at that thing going, wait a minute here. Do I want to respond to that? I don't know if I can. I'm sitting there looking at that going, I can't do that. I mean, I've worked really hard to get where I am with the things that I have and what have you. Give that up? Prepare to suffer, prepare to die? I can't do that. And maybe you're sitting there doing the same thing and going, why am I here then? I can't do that. Why am I here? If you're like me and you could admit that, you're taking your first step towards being a disciple. Because ultimately, at the heart of Christianity is the fact that Christianity is not about what we do, but it is about what God has already done. Because you see, when we can't deny ourselves, Jesus did. And when we can't take up our cross and prepare to suffer and die, Jesus carried his cross. He carried it to a hill outside of Jerusalem, and he suffered on it, and he died on it, and he looked down at those who were crucifying him. Looked down at you and I when we were unable to follow his mandates for discipleship, and he said, Father, forgive them. And he took our sin upon himself. And he died for that sin, and he put it to death so that we would no longer be separated from God. And then not only did he do this, He gave to us his righteousness. He gave to us his status. He made us beloved children of God, blameless, spotless, holy. And you see, it's really interesting. You know, the very folks that Jesus talked to and first laid out these teachings to, those first disciples, Peter and James and John and Matthew and Mark and Luke, all of those folks that Jesus first laid down this teaching to, they couldn't follow it either. Did you know that? Did you know that when it hit the fan, you know, and they came to arrest Jesus, all of these disciples who had followed him, who watched him do all of these miracles, who watched him heal the sick and raise the dead and all of these things, they left. They ran. They deserted him. They did not deny themselves. They did not suffer. They did not die. They got away as quickly as they possibly could. And Peter, who ran to begin with, kind of stayed back there on the fringes of the crowd. He followed them to the chief priest's house and everything else like that. And then he was confronted and he denied Jesus 3 times. None of them followed the teachings of Jesus, at least to begin with. But when the risen Christ appeared to them and told them what he had done for them, proclaimed the sheer grace of God that came in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, when the disciples found that they were forgiven, when they found that they were loved, when they found out what God had done by laying his life down for them, they couldn't wait to tell it to the world. And each and every one of them denied themselves, took up their cross, and followed him. 11 of them were killed for spreading the gospel. The 12th suffered isolation on an island until he died. Sheer grace transformed each and every one of them and helped them do the impossible. And my brothers and sisters, when we put our faith in Jesus Christ, when we put our trust in him and come to know the sheer grace of God, the impossible becomes possible for us too. Thanks be to God. Amen.